4 within the riparian buffer. So for the herbivory, I set up 3 leaf litter traps in this Y configuration that you see here. I left them out for about 10 days. I collected the contents and I visually assessed any herbivory damage that was on the leaves. And then I dried the contents following standard rainfall protocol, and then weighed the contents, separating them between leaves, woody debris, fruit, flower, and seeds. Because palms don't drop leaflets like seedlings do, I did some frond cuttings, and I did 1 from 3 palms per subvegetative plot. I then took a subset of 20 leaflets, put them on top of a whiteboard, and I took a photograph of it out in the field, so then I can measure the leaf damage to the leaflets using ImageJ software. For the insect counts, I did branch clippings and frond clippings again, and I aimed for 3 for the seedlings and the palms per subvegetative plot. I identified all the insects that I found to an order level, and I also did a sub-series of identifications focusing on bagworm and nettle caterpillars, and also weaver and yellow crazy ants. Now for the predation, I used mealworms, and I attached 6 of these pre-cut fronds here, and I attached them to either the trunk of 3 palms per subvegetative plot or 3 seedlings, and I kept it consistent, and I did it on only the pulai, bentenga, and sunkai. And then I recorded how many were removed within 24 hours. So I was also interested to see if there was any variation between those 6 seedling species that we used in the enrichment plantings. And so I repeated those same surveys, but I just adjusted the protocol so that it happened on 1 tree per seedling species per subvegetative plot. So for the herbivory and the insect counts, I actually did it on the same branch clipping. So I first identified all the insects that I found, again to the order level, and then the subcategorization of caterpillars and ants. And then I took 20 leaves from that clipping, again, put it on a whiteboard, and then I'm going to measure the leaf area loss using ImageJ. For the predation, I wasn't able to fit it into this field season because I just ran out of time. So when I come back in January, I'm going to repeat the same exact protocol that I described earlier, where I use mealworms and then I record how quickly they were removed within 24 hours. Now, for my second question, I'm interested in seeing if the margin position or the planting configuration impacts those same ecosystem functions again. So I'm repeating these surveys, but one, I'm going to do it in the middle of the riparian buffer, repeat it on the river edge and then the oil palm edge. And then for the planting configurations, I'm going to identify 3 replicates for the conspecific and the mixed within the riparian buffer. And then I'm going to repeat these same surveys on the focal seedling species and see if there's any variation between the level of ecosystem processes that we're seeing. Now, for my riparian complexity question, there's 2 major factors that I'm focusing on. The first is vegetative complexity, and the second is thermal complexity. So the first one, which is vegetative complexity, I have a terrestrial LiDAR scanner, which I put in the middle of each of the 4 subvegetative plots across all the 4 treatments. It takes a 360 scan of all the surrounding vegetation, and then it creates an XYZ file that you can process in R software and get a stand structural complexity index. And once I've done that, I'm going to compare the different restoration vegetation that's been restored in just 5 years. Now, for my thermal complexity, I'm actually looking at 3 different components within this. So the first one I'm wanting to compare is the macroclimate, and that's essentially just about ambient air temperature 2 meters off the ground. For that, I was using temperature and humidity data loggers that were supplied to me by TEMCON. I attached them to these bamboo sticks, shielded them with plastic trays to stop direct solar radiation impacting the results. And then I left them out in each of the subvegetative plots to record for about 2 weeks. For land surface temperature, I actually used a thermal camera. I went into the middle of each of these plots and I took a photo of the ground in 4 different directions, so north, east, southwest. And I repeated those pictures. So one set was taken in the morning and then one set was taken in the afternoon, because I'm interested in seeing not just what restoration treatment has the difference in the temperature between all 4, but I'm also interested to see what one might be the best at buffering those really hot temperatures during the middle of the day. And lastly, I'm interested in the microclimates. And for that, I focused on soil and leaf litter. I used these tiny little eye buttons that I either buried 5 centimeters into the soil or under about 5 centimeters worth of leaf litter in the vegetative plots. Now, one thing that I was interested in was seeing if in this short space of time, has the restoration already led to noticeable differences in the habitat selection behavior by insects? So I concentrated on butterflies, and I also did a density count of assassin bugs whilst I was doing this survey. So we followed the pollard method, in which you walk a transect and note all the butterflies. And we did a perimeter walk of the subvegetative plot, so it was 25 by 25 meters. We noted all the butterflies that we saw, identified them to species level, and then if they landed, we took temperature recordings of the vegetation that they landed on, 5 centimeters above, and also ambient air temperature. We repeated this survey, so that happened in the morning and also in the afternoon, because I was interested in seeing not just where these butterflies are choosing to be, but also if it's been impacted by the time of the day and the temperature that they're experiencing at that time. One thing that I'm interested in doing, even though it's probably going to be quite a challenge, is taking my temperature recordings that I did in the riparian buffer and seeing if any of the restoration treatments are already indicating a certain level of resilience to impending climate shifts. And one of the biggest concerns that I'm sure we're all aware of is climate change. So one of the first things I want to establish is thermal buffering potential. So I'm going to compare the temperatures that I recorded in each of those different treatments and compare them to nearby weather stations that are in open and cleared agricultural spaces and see what is that difference in the temperatures that we're seeing. I then want to take that relationship and I want to model it using predictions like World Clim 2 database that has climate predictions right up until 2080 to see which restoration treatment in the future might provide the most climate refuge for insects that naturally recur within the riparian margin. Now, I don't want to take up too much more of your valuable time, but I do have some preliminary results that I'm hoping is interesting for you guys to see. They're a little bit disjointed because some of it is based on the fieldwork I finished yesterday. So just to bear with me. When we look at the seedling survival data that's been collected over the past 5 years, this is cumulative mortality rate between the shaded and unshaded environment. And what we're seeing is that an unshaded environment has a higher mortality rate compared to seedlings that were shaded by mature palm oil. Interestingly, when we break it down even further, we see that Bintanga, Symphoduck, and Moranti had a higher mortality rate when they were growing in an exposed environment during their early development. For the insect counts, again, first looking at a shaded versus unshaded riparian margin, when I looked at it between those two environmental conditions and I ran an ANOVA test, I didn't pick up on a statistical difference between the two. But when I broke it down further into seedling species, we did find a statistical difference. And I haven't been able to pair it with a herbivory yet, but from some personal anecdotes I noticed in the field was that certain species like Symphoduck had a higher overall density of insects, but they also had some of the lowest herbivory damage, whereas Moranti had a really high herbivory, but really low insects that we were finding. So different seedling species are probably providing different benefits for what insects are trying to get out of these conservation hotspots. Interestingly, though, when we looked at the difference of palms between the treatments, so A, B, and D, there was a statistical difference in the density counts that we were seeing. So when we look at the control plot with just oil palm, we saw that there was a lower density of insects that were being seen. And I don't mean to rush the next slide, but interestingly, when we look at the mealworm removal rate, the same pattern actually shows, where the control plot has a lower rate of the mealworms being removed, sometimes just not being removed at all. And this was the same relationship that we saw in comparison to the passive or the shaded riparian margin. When I looked at the seedlings, though, for those three representatives of the Bintanga, Pulai, and Sacchi for a plot level, interestingly, the shaded margin had a lower predation level activity than the shaded, the unshaded margin. So what we're seeing is that Bintanga is the one that kind of sticks out to me, where in comparison to when it was unshaded, it consistently had all the mealworms or nearly all of them removed. But when they were unshaded, it was inconsistent and sometimes not touched at all. So these are actually the scans that I took with the terrestrial LiDAR scanner. They haven't been processed, but I thought it was interesting for you guys to have a look anyway. So this is the shaded treatment versus the control. And I'm hoping that you guys can see, one, it's just amazing detail, but on a vertical and also on a horizontal axis, the shaded treatment just has a lot more diversity and therefore creates a lot more different types of habitats for insects and animals that may live in these areas. And compared to the control treatment, it also is just a lot more uniform and it has a very exposed open canopy up ahead. This actually ties in quite nicely with the land surface temperature that we saw. And these are pictures that I took, one in the shaded treatment and one in the control treatment. When we look at the shaded treatment in the morning and the afternoon, compared to the control, the overall temperature is a lot lower in the shaded treatment. But when we also look at these ranges here, you see that the control treatment reaches nearly 38.5 degrees Celsius, nearly 40 degrees in comparison to the shaded treatment, where the highest was 29.3. So some preliminary conclusions that we may be able to draw from the restoration that we've done so far is that mature palm oil being maintained within the margin might actually be very positive for the restoration success because they're providing shade and lowering the heat stress for seedling species that are planted within the margin during their early development. When we look down on a seedling species level, we kind of already know this, but it's good to know that the species that you select for particular restoration treatments is very important. So if we were to want to try and recreate the unshaded restoration treatment in future RURSA sites, we may not want to choose species like Cempedac, Meranti, and Bintanga because they had a higher mortality rate. So you would just be spending a lot of money on something that may not survive as well. And lastly, when we look at ecosystem functions, when we compared it to a shaded and unshaded environment, we're not seeing a difference. But breaking it down again to those seedling species, we do see an interaction between those factors. And again, it just reiterates that same message that it's very important to select the right type of restoration, given what type of protocol that you're wanting to create and what you're also wanting to get out of these conservation hotspots. So the last thing that I want to say is, like a lot of research, this project is very much the result of really, really hard work that came way before I was even involved. It's run by Sinar Mass, who runs the daily operations at Smart Tree, and they're working in collaboration with the University of Cambridge, IPV University, and the University of Nottingham. I want to thank everyone who helped me with my research because it was really hard and I would not have been able to do it without them. And also thank you for you guys for listening to me prattle on. So thank you. Any questions?
Okay, now we come to question and answer. So please, you may ask in Indonesian and I will translate it, or you can directly make a question in English. So please. Pak Heri mau duluan silahkan. Sekarang aja. Siapa yang mau duluan? Atau Pak Heri nggak apa-apa? Dimulai aja Pak.
Okay, thank you. Because so low voice, right? Sorry, because maybe I'm late to come this room, and so that I don't know what they present in the early presentation, but can you tell me about the background, why you conduct this research about the riparian, right? Because in Indonesian rule, the government already make the rule in the riparian. We cannot planting everything, included the palm. So in the 50-meter riparian, we cannot planting with the palm or maybe forest plantation and other. So, and the second, you mean restoration or enrichment mean you plant or it is a natural forest or other plant there. I think that, thank you.
That's all right. So just so that I understand the first question, it was why are we focusing on riparian margin restoration, even when they're not planted in standard agricultural plantations? Is that right? Or okay.
Is that natural or planted?
Yeah. So absolutely fantastic question. Thank you. In terms of why we're focusing on riparian margins in particular, one major factor is that the RSPO, the Roundhouse Table of Sustainable Palm Oil, has highlighted particularly that riparian margins need to be restored, or they need to be prioritized in restoration research. And currently when I do literature research, there's not a lot that's being done on riparian margin. And in terms of trying to create conservation hotspots, prioritizing the restoration of riparian margins might actually be a lot more beneficial than other areas because of the substantial environmental benefits that they have. In terms of where they're being planted, I might be wrong in understanding this, but the mature palm oil at the Smart Tree site are ones that they planted to the river edge, and they're remnants from the existing oil palm that they planted from previous cycles. So from what I understand, and the control treatment is being planted right up to the river edge, is their standard protocol for how they're traditionally treating riparian margins. So and actually that ties in with the second question, which is there were 3 different restoration treatments. 2 of them had enrichment plantings with the same 6 seedling species, and one of them was just left completely alone. And so the vegetation that we're seeing there is one that just naturally regenerated and came in through animal seed distribution and things like that. So there is a comparison of what is it like when we invest and try and restore these sites versus if we were to just leave it alone. And that is quite important to potentially find out if we're wanting to budget accordingly as well.
Cukup atau masih ada? Silakan.
Yeah, did that make sense? Yes, yes.
In Smart Tree.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You know him?
Who's Pak Agung?
Yeah, yeah. Agung? Pak Agung?
Yeah.
So the question is in the treatment,
yeah,
right? You saw that all of the plants do benefit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this means riparian also planting the palm.
Yeah.
That's right. Why want to conduct planting like this? Because our government give the rule cannot planting everything for 50 meters until 100 meters from
Yeah. Can we stop recording? I feel like I might get people into trouble. But from what I understand as a third party is that is the standard protocol. And so it was used as the control. So
Can you just go back to that the first slide?
oh,
Because
the
yeah,
treatments?
the treatment is in ABC is in the first slide, right?
Yeah. So let's have a look. Where did I put it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all the oil palm that's currently in there is the first Rota site was planted in 2018. So they're about 5 to 6 years old, and the Rota 2 site was planted in 2019. So there are just about a year's difference between the two.
Yeah, my understanding actually it's in buffer, so it's not in riparian. So there's riparian and then buffer.
Mm.
So that's in buffer.
Oh yeah,
area.
sorry, yeah, that was my bad not being very
Yeah.
clear about that. Sorry.
Yeah, we have been there several times with Budami, so I know a little bit, but I didn't do research directly. But yeah, that's my understanding. Thank you, Pak Heri. Any other question, Pak Hari? Do you still some? Oke. Yang lain silakan, bahasa Indonesia juga boleh. Ya, riparian ini kelihatannya sudah diatur oleh negara, kemudian pemerintah daerahnya juga punya gitu. Jadi kadang-kadang override peraturan yang dari pusat katanya begitu. Jadi tergantung dia menggunakan yang pusat apa yang pemerintah daerahnya gitu. Dan ini akan dicoba ini kan miliknya perusahaan besar. Nah, akan dicoba juga di smallholders. Yes, I think in the future, I think there is a program for smallholders. So
yes.
because this is in Smart Tree is a research station basically, but later on we'll do this kind of riparian action in smallholders farmers. Yeah. Ada pertanyaan lagi, silakan. Bahasa Indonesia juga boleh. Yuk, silakan. Siapa yang mau tanya? Atau Petra mau tanya duluan? Oke.
I'm always around as well afterwards if people prefer to come up to me directly. So no pressure.
Saya nggak paham yang buffer itu Pak. Buffer itu apa? Nah, terus sama yang bagian data boxplot tadi Pak, ada yang cempaka, meranti.
Oh.
Ya, yang
Yeah. So yeah, this is just a schematic that I roughly drew up, and it's of the buffer area. It was set up so that it was 50 meters on either side of the river, so it's about 100 meters in total in width, and each treatment is about 400 meters in length. No sampling was done within the last 50 meters between the treatments, and yeah, I concentrated a lot of my sampling within the 4 sub-vegetative plots that were set up. That way I just have a lot of replicates for what I'm wanting to do. And so it was already pre-selected. For the box plots, which ones were you interested in? This one? Further back? Yeah. Okay, so for this, it is the 6 seedling species that were used for those enrichment plantings in treatment A and treatment C. Basically the shaded, which has the mature palm oil in it, versus the unshaded where they were removed. What I've got here is the insect overall insect density count that we saw on each of the branch clippings that we did. And yeah, so there's when I looked at it between shaded and unshaded, I didn't find a statistical difference. But when I broke it down for comparisons between the seedling species, there was a difference between the species, and yeah, that was quite interesting for me.
Jelas, Pak.
Buffer juga jelas ya. Jadi ada yang bagian buffer, ada yang tidak tadi. Yeah, I think it's clear with that what she said. Ada lagi? Silahkan. Atau Maris mau tanya juga? Silahkan Maris. Belum. Oke. Ada lagi silahkan dari YouTube atau dari ada dua, bisa diapain? Oh ya. This is the question from.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay, the first question is from Mr. Nurfianto Gier Pangidung. The question is, the first question, how the treatments affect oil palm pollinator, and the second one, from the result of this study, what are the consideration of research and application of intercropping and agroforestry in oil palm plantation? And from Mr. Isaac Barrock, out of curiosity, Mr. Sacchi, for the insect transect, is there a reason why the butterflies and assassin bugs were chosen to survey? Do they have a significant ecological importance in the oil palm ecosystem?
Okay. First question.
Okay. First question. How the treatments affect oil palm pollinator?
So yeah, that is something that we're wanting to explore once I've collected more data. At the moment, I was just concentrating on density levels between the different treatments. I haven't broken it down to what specific species we're seeing yet. In terms of the pollinator potential, that is something that my coworker, actually Jamal, might be interested in, because he's looking at biodiversity levels. We're kind of discussing how to combine our results together. And that's the amazing thing about this project and also research in general, is that you are able to combine data sets and get a clearer picture, because trying to physically look at everything is a little bit impossible. So that's when you lean on each other, and it's great when you can share results in that way. There are definitely certain species that we're wanting to boost up. One that I concentrated on was the yellow crazy ants and the weaver ants, because they're sort of highlighted as good pest control. And that's also the reason why I also did notes of whenever I saw a bagworm or a nettle caterpillar and in what treatment were they turning up. Because if we can find out which restoration treatment has higher pest control species and also lower pests, that might be something that would be really beneficial to introduce within established oil palm plantations, and kind of pitch that as a good thing when you're trying to recreate these conservation hotspots in other areas, if you can prove that they're effective at pest management and control.
Okay. From the result of this study, what are the consideration of research and application of intercropping and agroforestry in oil palm plantation?
Yeah. So one of the other aims of this project in particular is to not just see what's being beneficial for conservation, even though that's very important, but to see what are the economic applications of it as well. So from the preliminary results that we're seeing from my research is that the mature palm oil being in the riparian buffer might be good for shading and restoring the rate of restoration. And in terms of cutting down on the economic costs as well, if you don't have to remove the palm oil that's there, that's a lot less economic input. And also they are still being continuously harvested, from what I understand, the mature ones that are left in the margin. So they're actually still producing fruit or oil to be extracted from. So yeah, in terms of intercropping, I haven't really looked into that side yet, but for the economic side, one thing that we're hoping to tie it to is with the pollination work that we're going to do in the future, and then also considering what is the most beneficial for conservation and an economic front is which of those restoration treatment hits most of those targets all at once, and then therefore be replicated in future riparian margins as well. Hopefully that answers. So Jamal actually set up bioacoustic samplers inside the riparian margin. He's about 3,618 hours that he has to go through for his bioacoustics. Hopefully he can do a talk when he comes back next year. And by then, maybe not by then, but he might have analyzed some of those recordings. And he did also frog analysis as well. And he's seeing a difference between the restoration treatments in density of animals, amphibians, and things that he's picking up. Yeah, sorry, he has all the cool data.
Okay. Another one. For the insect transect, is there a reason why the butterflies and assassin bugs were chosen to survey? Do they have significant ecological importance in the oil palm ecosystem?
So the reason why I chose butterflies for the surveys is one, they're thermally quite sensitive to temperature fluctuations, so they were very good species to use as an indicator of how temperature is impacting these riparian margins. And butterflies and moths are closely linked with pollination in general across most agricultural crops because they're kind of generalist in some cases. The assassin bugs, they are pest species, so I just did a density count because I happened to be walking a transect anyway, so it was just additional data that I could pick up at the same time and sort of round out my data set a little bit. So yeah.
There's two more.
Okay.
From Mahardika Gama, dear Ms. Sacchi, is there any parameter to observe the bunch production as you mentioned in the background that the riparian restoration give an economical impact, OP productivity, and how was going it on?
So that's something that I am potentially going to try and fit into my research project. I think it might be a bit too big to attach to what I already have. We are going to have future PhD students joining us, and they might take up spillover effects of seeing which oil palm plantation or like the crops that are right next to each of these restoration treatments, which of them are potentially doing better due to increased insect density for pollination, increased soil fertility, that these buffers are cycling through like carbon or nitrogen as well. From what I understand that Smart Tree is doing is that they're already collecting soil samples within these areas, and they're analyzing the fertility of the soil between these different treatments. That's something that I haven't gotten access to in terms of data sets, so I can't comment on it. But yeah, that's something that they are exploring because they want to see which one is a good restoration treatment to boost up the economy and then pitch it to future sites when they're asking for trying to recreate this in other areas as well.
Okay, one more. From Siti Rahmah. Good afternoon, Sir Purnama and Ms. Sacchi. I'm Cici. I want to ask,
Oh,
is
Ibu
there
Vero
any
saya
special
bisa.
species planned for restoration and conservation in oil palm plantation
Iya,
at soil type different
Oke.
like clay, sandy,
Satu orang kan.
and sulfate acid for
Dia
sustainable
apalagi di
insect
pinggir pantai
pollinator,
begitu.
predator, and parasitoid can increase fruit set.
Kadang-kadang saya bisa satu rumah orang sakit. Itu pasti. Saya ada langsung libur.
Pollinating insects, maybe ones that do pest control as well, ones that have been linked with increasing soil fertility, but that one I would say is more closely linked to seedling species and vegetation. And I know that that's why Sengon was selected for these enrichment planting, is because they have really deep roots that help with the restoration, and that's something that they wanted to trial as well. So there was that consideration of not just increasing the vegetation, but seeing which seedling species would be the most beneficial for certain characteristics. So increasing pollinators to these areas, increasing the soil fertility, and in what combination do they work best as well. Yeah, I probably missed something.
Will influence the type of vegetation in there. Type of vegetation will also influence the pollinator or something like that. So it's all related.
Yeah, it's with all the ecosystems, it's all just one connected, and it's really hard to break it down sometimes because you never know when you pull at one string which one's gonna get impacted. Personal observation, would it be sandy? Because it was pretty sandy area to work in, but I'm not a soil scientist at all, so sorry, I'm not able to say that with confidence.
Ada lagi? Yang barusan apa? Kan? Oke. Nanya.
Ya, tanya tentang publikasi. Research-nya boleh dimention nggak?
Is there any publication related with this from Ed?
Yeah, so sorry. There has been quite a few papers. The managing oil palm plantations. It's called, if you look up BEFTA or BERTA, you will find several publications which have gone into pre, post, and post 2-year data that they've been collecting. And that is, looking at, some of them have compared microclimates at different distances from the river, looking at initial results of what has worked best in terms of introducing animal populations. So it's those publications are very much preliminary results of what do you see after 2 years worth of restoration, and now we're about 5 years since the start.
Ya, jadi restorasi ini sudah 5 tahun, kemudian 2 tahun itu sudah ada publikasi. Mungkin kalau di Google pakai BEFTA atau RERTA, mungkin bisa ketemu. Jadi sudah ada beberapa publikasi. Sorry, in Indonesian, basically. There's been several publications regarding this project, right? BEFTA and RERTA, and collaboration between, actually not only Cambridge and Smarta is also with university in Malaysia, I believe, and also NGO in Malaysia, and also IPB. So there are several institutions collaborate in this project. Yeah,
and I think that's one of the amazing positives about this project as well. and science in general is getting all of these different experts from
Right.
different institutes.
Right.
working
And the
together.
project is still ongoing, so yeah. So many students actually, also postdoc also working in there. So yeah, we're collecting more and more data. So hopefully we'll give some more presentation later on.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
quite a few in the team that are joining later. So
Right.
yeah, they'll be able to present as well.
Oke. Ada pertanyaan lagi Mas online? Yang dari dalam ruangan, kalau masih ada silakan. Anyone would like to have any question? Ada? Lydia?
No pressure.
Oke. Oke, kalau tidak ada sekali lagi kita beri applause terhadap buat Sacchi. Thank you very much Sacchi. And we have, what is this? Certificate. So I'll give you a certificate to you. Thank you. You are one of the speakers in this department for the webinar. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, thank you. It's just a statement that you have in a presentation here. Okay, thank you very much for all audience in this room and also for all audience in Zoom. And I believe there is a link for a certificate, or you have to put something in Zoom. Okay. But if you register in the Zoom, I believe that you will get an e-certificate based on your email. So thank you very much, and I will close this webinar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.